technology and education and learning, humanities, sciences, there is a revolution brewing.
Are the brightest minds working on the most important problems?
Today, hands-on research remains a hallmark of the MIT education.
MIT is the logical place to define the 21st century liberally educated person.
In coming to MIT, you're joining a community that pursues learning in order to make a positive impact in the world.
MIT opens our minds to what's possible, and even more uniquely, it pushes us. It's continuing to push the envelope to another level.
We do put mind and hand together to help society. It's part of our credo. It's part of who we are.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning. We're delighted that you're able to join us this morning. I want to specifically welcome the Alumni Leadership Conference and Corporation Development Committee members who've joined us bright and early this morning, ahead of the students who don't get up for another couple of hours. This third symposium of our series looks at the topic of education and MIT's role in leading the emerging revolution in higher education. As many of you know, the structure of higher education is undergoing a radical reconstruction. Technology is becoming a leading force in developing new and innovative teaching and learning methods. And that presence in the classroom has led to, or we hope will lead to, a more personalized educational experience for students, taking into account individual learning styles and pace. Current generations are engaging more closely with using technology, especially in cross-disciplinary interests, and this is leading to new ways of thinking about how we teach. And as the world and students' academic interests and needs have started to change, MIT has also begun to tackle head-on the challenges that arise from trying to augment the classroom with rich extramural experiences that will help foster the world's future global leaders. A central element of MIT's engagement with these technological changes is really working to try and find the best ways to use these potentially disruptive forces to enhance the residential-based experience that we believe is essential to our students' education. This morning, we're going to look at these topics from several different perspectives. In this first session, we're going to look at how MIT's educational initiatives are reaching outward to the world through MITx and other online learning initiatives, through global service opportunities for our students, through outreach to STEM initiatives in schools, and to leaders in the corporate world. In the second session, which will be chaired by Christine Ortiz, the Dean of Graduate Education and Professor of Material Sciences and Engineering, we will look inward at how MIT's educational ecosystem is evolving, building on our own unique culture of mind and hand, but also fostering research, innovation, and leadership development within that framework. And we'll talk about how these changes are enabling us to rethink fundamental aspects of a traditional education. And finally, we'll conclude with a panel discussion on rethinking learning for the 21st century, which will be chaired by Danielle Hastings, Dean of Undergraduate Education and Professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics. We're going to make the introductions short because you want to hear from these folks. So I'm simply going to identify our speakers for this first session, and they're then going to come to the podium and just speak directly. So for the first session, our speakers are Anand Agarwal, Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science and President of edX. Amy Smith, Senior Lecturer in Mechanical Engineering and founder of Dlab. Eric Klopfer, Associate Professor of Education and Director of the Scheller Teaching Education Program. And Jonathan Larrick, Lecturer and Director of the Sloan Executive MBA Program. The idea is that each of our speakers will speak without further introduction, and we're going to try and budget some time at the end for a short Q&A. Anand.
Thank you, Eric. You know, it's, a lot of people have talked about great lecture being theater. The lecturing is truly theater, and the great lectures are just great theater. In my view, if great lecture is theater, then the future of learning is games. So in this discussion, I'll spend some time talking about how online learning is borrowing from gaming technologies and understanding how a new generation of students think and behave and try to dramatically improve the learning experience. So let me first start with what we think the new classroom is going to look like. So MIT and Harvard launched edX in May of this year. And edX is a worldwide learning initiative that is offering Harvard, MIT content from courses from a number of our university partners to students worldwide. This is an example of something we saw. We didn't do this. Someone pointed out this blog to me, 6002x.blogspot.com, and completely unbeknownst to us, in this country, in this remote part of the world, we had some students that were sitting down doing some work, working on problem sets together. They were doing a lab together. They had no lectures anymore. They were watching videos from edX, little video snippets interleaved with exercises, but the work was collaborative. Okay, this is the new classroom. No big lectures. People do videos and so on. So where do you think this was happening? Where do you think this happened? I will give you a hint. It's in a remote part of the world. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll move on. You'll be guessing for a long time. So this give you a better hint? Mongolia. Okay, completely unbeknownst to us, a professor in Mongolia had about 20 students in a classroom, in high school no less, having them do a sophomore level, junior level MIT class, and had students doing this. Give you a quick snippet of what a typical course looks like, and then go into how we are looking at gamifying the whole learning experience. So this is kind of the dashboard that students will see when they come on to edX. The key component of it is courseware, where each week the students view a set of video snippets, 3 to 15 minutes long, interleaved with interactive exercises. Having these exercises between these videos is critical. Having videos be 3 to 10 minutes long is also critical. I'm not sure about you, but my attention span in a talk is maybe 15, 20 minutes, tops. The attention span of my 13-year-old and 18-year-old and so on, probably, what do you think, 5 minutes? And here we are, for the past 1,000 years, dragging them into a classroom. Okay, I love your fortitude. You're here to hear us speak at 9 o'clock in the morning, fantastic. But I never went to a 9 o'clock class, never did. Okay, and so how can we drag our students to these big lecture halls early in the morning? So it's videos with interleaved exercises. And the key is, by having them do something every 5 or 10 minutes is critical. Students have told us that getting them engaged and doing exercises is key. In fact, I was just outside here, and a parent of one of our alumni stopped by and said, this fall course is much improved from the spring course. I said, how so? And they said, you have a lot more of these interactive exercises between the lectures. And that really, really engages us. And we are seeing a lot of evidence of that. So students watch these videos. They have a free textbook. We have a deal with Elsevier that makes available a free textbook online. It doesn't make sense to offer free courses worldwide and then charge them $100 or $200 for a textbook. So Elsevier has been very helpful here. There's a discussion forum where students talk to each other and help each other online. So I'm not sure about you, but when you talk to a teenager, it seems that they speak some strange tongue. It goes, go away. It's just like, 2 words is a big deal, but usually it's grunts and eye rolls and things like that. It's a whole new language. But what I've discovered is that you text them, they respond. It's incredible. It's incredible. My son will be sitting next door, and I text him, boom, I get back a response. It's a new world out there. And so the discussion forum is incredible. Students love to talk in the discussion forum. They're asking questions and discussing content and concepts. It is huge. It is the new world. And then we have the profile that you see back here shows the students how they're doing right there and then, shows them the grades and so on. So as an example, so here is an example of an interleaved exercise. Here's a little problem, and we give boxes for students to answer their questions. Online learning platforms, MOOCs, as they're called, massive open online courses, have been dinged a little bit because a lot of many of the platforms just offer videos and multiple choice. And many professors have dinged them saying, but we seem to be going backwards with video and multiple choice. The edX platform, amazingly enough, in the spring semester, had no multiple choice. And you may ask, why didn't you have multiple choice? Well, it turns out that, so we give, this is a learning experience. We give students lots and lots of chances to answer questions. They can enter equations, they can enter numerics and things like that. If you give them multiple choice, you're guaranteed to get the right answer in 4 tries or 5 tries, so what's the point? So students will just guess, and you're done. There's no learning there. And so we did not have multiple choice. And then, people began dinging us saying, gee, they don't even have multiple choice. So, so we introduced multiple choice in the fall semester. So students can enter exercises, they get instant feedback as they answer questions. You get a green check mark out here if it's right. If it's wrong, you get an X. So as I said, let's now talk about how we want to bring the gaming experience. And I really believe this. Okay, great lectures were theater, then the future of learning is in games. So let's start with one of the first things that we discovered. And by the way, if you'd asked me about any of this stuff 8 months ago, when leaders like Raphael and others, a bunch of us sat down together, envisioning what the world was going to look like and dreaming up some of this stuff, we had absolutely no idea what was going to work and what was not going to work. So every single lesson, every single game changer and gaming that we're going to talk about is some things we have learned through this experiment in the past 6 months. The first example is that instant feedback is an absolute game changer. Why are video games exciting? I believe one of the single most important things is instant feedback. Okay, sitting there, and I'll use a politically correct video game. So you take a block and you rotate it and you put it into a slot. It fits or it doesn't. You rotate it again and it somehow fits. And so you do all of these things, and you get instant feedback, and you keep trying till you get it right. And so that is huge. So in our exercises that I showed you, students can keep entering answers and keep trying and trying till they get it right. And students on our forums have told us that this green tick mark, this green check mark, the sign of success, they've said that this has been emblazoned in their minds. They wake up at night dreaming about green check marks, okay? And students said that in our spring semester course, and students are saying that in our fall semester courses. Okay, so there must be this clear consistency there. In fact, a sort of T-shirts has sprouted up around the world for edX, and every single T-shirt design has a green check mark on it somewhere. Now, if you'd asked me to predict what would be the single most important symbol in T-shirts, where those T-shirts to come out for edX, I would not have known about this little lowly green check mark. But this has become an edX cult symbol. But to me, what's more important about this is that it's about instant feedback. Students are saying they're working much, much harder because they can see signs of success. In a bricks and mortar classroom, you submit a homework. If you're lucky, you get it back partially graded 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, you've forgotten all about it. Here, with instant feedback, students are complaining, say, Anand, we're spending a lot more time on this course. On campus, we had 20 students taking the course in a blended model last semester. And they came and told me, we're spending a lot more time on these replacement for lectures, these sequences. I said, uh-oh, is that a bad thing? They said, no, we're learning a lot more, it's good, but we're spending a lot more time on this. So you can figure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but they are really engaged. Another example of instant feedback is students can watch their grades as they go along. Even in the final exam, you answer a question, boom, you get instant feedback to see your grade bop up a little bit. Now, look, in our day and age, maybe before my time, because I was not like that, there was a time when people would do things just for the purity and beauty of doing things. Well, learning is good. But in today's day and age, It's all about, what am I going to, kids today will say, okay, why should I learn that? Okay, what is the application area of that? Why is it important? Okay, so this is another example of how instant feedback, gives them a sense of where they are in the course. The next part of gamification is virtual laboratories. People have said that laboratories are one of the big research challenges of online learning. So the edX platform has spent a lot of effort, and our team has done some heroic work on building some of these virtual simulation environments. It's no different from a gaming environment. Okay, these environments, the simulation environments, mimic a lab experience in a classroom. So here, for example, there's a little component, a circuit, and students can play around with the circuit, try this and try that, and do what-if kinds of experiments. And not only that, they can even play with music. In fact, in the discussion forum, there's a whole bunch of discussion about, wow, I love that reggae music. And one of the things we're thinking about now is have students upload their own music. So they can use their own music as part of these designs and allow themselves to see how things sound, as opposed to just doing some theory and so on. So as we build more and more simulation environments in physics, we're working with Walter Lewin and John Belcher and others, looking at courses like Aero 2X, which is the undergraduate physics class, Aero 1, which is the mechanics class, where we're looking to create gaming experiences with things like inclined planes. You put a ball on it, it rolls down. You put a square on it, it slides down, and you can see which goes faster. So we're coming up with these gaming kinds of scenarios for students to play with these things and really experience things in a simulated environment. So this is another big thing that is part of edX, and bringing music into it, instant feedback, and more of the gaming experience. So here's another example. Design is a big part of learning, where you give someone a clean slate and say, how do you do something? Which is a very different approach from problem solving, where you give someone a problem and say, what is the answer? This is the inverse, which is, here's a clean sheet of paper. Okay? Go build me a car that gives me 100 miles per hour. Okay? Go design something. And this part is, I really believe this is one of the holy grails of online learning. How do we get that? So we made some steps in that direction. So we have this platform that our colleagues here, Jacob White and Chris Sturman built, which is another online lab component where students get a blank sheet of paper. Okay? And then we ask them, go design something. And so they get a parts kit here. They get analysis tools here. It's like a workbench. And they can build these things much like you put Legos together. Okay, and you can instantly press a button here and see what it looks like, the waveform looks like so. So we're building these environments, and it's more gaming. What's gaming about? You're exploring, you're building things, where you give them Lego blocks, wooden blocks, building houses. And so we want to do this in every field, think about mechanics or physics, the humanities, and so on. So the other aspect of gaming is rewards. Okay, now, I have played some games. Why am I being, shy about it? Absolutely, I play video games. And so one of the cool things about it is that, there was a game where my colleague, Steve Ward, was at 15,000. Okay, I stayed up the whole night to beat that 15,000 point record. Okay, and I did reach 15,050, and then I stopped. And so point systems, badges, and gaming is critical in bringing this gaming thing into learning. You get those competitive juices flowing. And so our discussion forum in our first course had this concept of karma points. You answer a question right, you get karma points. If a professor or an instructor says, hey, good answer, you get more karma points. And as you get karma points and more points, you get more and more levels of proficiency, you get rewards. Ultimately, at I think 5,000 points, you become instructor grade. Okay, think of that as edX Jedi. Okay, so that's a big deal. And the problem with this, of course, is you have other problems. There were 2 or 3 students, being very heavy-handed on the panels. And so we have to figure out how, when very young people get incredible powers, how do you balance that? But that's a research question. So all in all, this whole gaming experience was terrific. And we did a survey at the end of the course, and we asked students, if you've taken a comparable university course, how do you rate this online course? And the statistics were shocking. This is a bit biased. This was for students who survived towards the end of the course, so they were survivors, 10,000 of them, and we had 6,100 survey responses. Okay, these are big numbers. And 63% said that the experience was much better than a corresponding university class. 36% said that it was at least as good. And staggering, 1%, just 1% said that the experience was much worse. I have not seen a survey where there's been such a spread between good and not good. And here's a quick little quote from, anecdotal quote from a student. This was the most rewarding experience of my life. So I think we've been gaming into learning. I think we can take learning to the next level and actually make it fun and interesting. The real challenge will be to see if we can do that and bring someone in at 9 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here to celebrate the inauguration of Rafael Reif. Congratulations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Dlab and the experiences in that. So we just heard some really wonderful things about how MIT brings its educational resources to the world. And Dlab is a little bit of the inverse of that. It's how the world brings its educational resources to MIT. The program is called Dlab, and I just want to have a very large asterisk to say that there are many, many programs at MIT that also have global engagement. But I'll just share with you some of the experiences of Dlab. So Dlab is all about development, design, and dissemination. And we focus on technologies that improve the lives of people living in poverty. If these are the three pillars of Dlab, the foundation is discovery and dialogue. We believe in experiential learning, and we believe in community engagement. And for this reason, fieldwork is a very important component of the work that we do with our students. I'd like to share a couple of stories that tell how all of the classes that we offer fit together. We have 20 different classes that are part of the Dlab suite, and we work with over 300 students a year. We have projects in 25 countries and 5 distinct research programs. And somehow, students find a way to wander through this complexity and gain meaningful experiences. I'll start by telling you the story of Jody Wu and Global Cycle Solutions. As a sophomore, Jody took the Dlab development class, and she learned a lot about agriculture and agricultural processing. She learned that smallholder farmers store their maize in dried ears of corn, and she learned herself that it's very difficult to remove it by hand. She learned that machines like these make the process much faster. These machines were developed in Guatemala, and she was going to be traveling to Tanzania, where corn was also a staple crop. So she thought perhaps one of these corn processing machines would be useful in Tanzania. So she learned how to weld, she built one, and she took it with her to Tanzania. She talked to farmers there, and she found while they were interested in that type of machine, they were not interested in that machine. It was too expensive and too heavy. She realized there was an opportunity for an improved maize sheller that would be mobile and less expensive. So she came back to Dlab after her IAP field trip, really excited about the design class. She said, Amy, I have a great idea for a project. And she presented it in the class, and she was able to recruit other students. And they worked on and built a mobile maize sheller as their project. She received a fellowship to go back to Tanzania and work on the project with technicians at a local workshop. Between them, they developed a working prototype, and by the end of the summer, the young gentleman in the far photograph had rented this machine, and in less than a month, earned enough money shelling maize, going from farm to farm, to pay for the machine itself. Jody was very excited about this and realized there was an opportunity to use pedal-powered technologies to lift people out of poverty. So she came back, and she took 2 other Dlab classes, Development Ventures and the Dissemination class, and she developed a business called Global Cycle Solutions that built and distributed pedal-powered technologies in East Africa. She now lives in Tanzania, running that company, and she's received a variety of awards, an Echoing Green Fellowship. She was awarded one of America's most promising social entrepreneurs by Business Week, and she was a TED Fellow. This is her life now. She lives in Arusha, Tanzania, and she's the CEO of Global Cycle Solutions. Shanti Kleeman was a graduate student who got engaged in Dlab. Shanti is one of those students who's interested in just about everything. When she took Dlab, she went to Ghana, and she learned how to drill wells, and she learned about pump technologies. She learned about casting and metalworking in a local workshop, and she learned water treatment techniques. As a graduate student, her research focused on helping to develop a factory in northern Ghana, working with Susan Murcott, on pure home water. And she developed and designed the water storage tank that enabled that factory to move forward. After graduating, she got a fellowship. And the first part of that fellowship, she spent working in Ethiopia with Mercy Corps, using some of the skills that she had learned during her Dlab experience and her graduate time here. And now for the second half of that fellowship, she's an International Hunger Fellow at the Congressional Hunger Center in Washington, D.C. The third student I want to tell you about is Amos Winter. Amos traveled to Tanzania on a Public Service Center fellowship, working with a Dlab community partner, Whirlwind Wheelchairs. He learned a lot about wheelchairs while he was there and was so excited about it, he wanted to come back and teach his own Dlab class. So he started wheelchair design in the developing countries and taught this class for 5 years. During the process, he learned a lot more about wheelchairs and learned that there were very significant voids in what was available and what was really needed by people in the fields. So he designed a new type of wheelchair, one that uses levers to drive the wheels and allow you to change, essentially to change gears. So you can put your hands at the top to go up hills, or if you want to go fast, put your hands lower on the levers. He later traveled to India to work out the production of this wheelchair, and it's currently in production and slated for production in India to be able to produce 1,000 wheelchairs a month and distribute them around the world. Amos recently got hired as a faculty member here at MIT, and he's an assistant professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. These alumni will surely shape the future in business, in policy, and in academia. And their global experiences here at MIT surely shaped their perspective. But the title of this symposium is not the future, it's the future of education. So I want to share just a few thoughts that I've had on the future of education. My vision for the future of education is to expand our classrooms, to make along the infinite corridor a number of infinite classrooms that are closer to villages in Africa, to favelas in Brazil, to cities in India, where students can engage directly in co-creation with community partners. Well, how would we do this? Well, we would use some of the technology that's been developed in other initiatives that you heard about earlier, but also we would engage students in a different type of study abroad program, a program where they remain registered as MIT students, but they're the hands and eyes in the field. They're working directly with the community partners, and they are working in collaboration with their teammates back at MIT. They're able to interact directly with the people for whom they are designing technologies and get feedback right away to their student peers at MIT. So this is one of the things that I envision as the future of education and the future of global experiences in education. That students can find a way to interact both with their peers at MIT and with the community partners in the field. And I believe that this future of education will help us improve technologies that are developed in order to improve the lives of people living in poverty, and that in so doing, the future of education will impact the future of this planet. Thank you. sorry.
Thanks, and good morning. So this morning I want to talk about MIT and STEM education. Specifically, I want to talk about how we reach the next generation of learners and how we teach the next generation of learners. In the process, I'm going to pick up on a couple of the themes that Anand started this morning. So let me start by defining the next generation of learners. They go by many names. I'm going to call them millennials here today. And there have been many labels sort of attached to this generation, and I don't want to sort of describe them all by the same number of labels. They're clearly a diverse generation, but they do differ. If you've been in a classroom, if you've been a parent, if you've been a professor, you know that the students today are different than the students of previous generations, as previous generations have changed before them. At the same time, we're putting different demands on these students. So we think about the skills and the things that we want them to learn in school and in life. And they're not the same things that were present maybe even 10 years ago. We think about ways of thinking like creativity and critical thinking, ways of working and communicating and collaborating. We heard Anant refer to communicating with his students by text messages or his kids by text message. Tools for working in the world, skills for living in the world as well. Both of these are important. We think about schools as being able to educate students in many different ways. And there's many different groups that have thought to describe these and think about what the characteristics they want for students today. This is one particular definition of those. At the same time, the students are also defining in themselves how they want to learn. They want to be social, they want to be fun, they want it to be fun, they want it to be technology infused and real and participatory. There's many other labels we can think about this, and there's many different influences we can think about the way why they want these things, the ways that they particularly engage in their life outside of the classroom, and they want those things to be more similar to each other. So how does this actually inform us in the way that we design educational environments? Well, we can look at educational environments as they existed 50 years ago. Here's some pictures from MIT from some number of years ago. And we can see how dramatically they've changed today. They're in color, mostly. And there's more boards, I'm pretty sure. And then we can think about how people think about this now changing for the millennial generation. How should this change? Well, this is how some people think it should look, which just looks like slightly less comfortable chairs. And if you look really closely, I think there's a spaceship over here somewhere. Right there. But otherwise, it looks pretty much the same. But we really want to think about how we reach these millennial learners. We want to think about why we want to reach these millennial learners as well. And specifically, coming from an MIT perspective, I think about we should want them to come to MIT. So regardless of whether they come to MIT, we should want them to have the values that we think we have here. And we should want them to sort of think about why they should want to come here. And similarly, we should give them the skills that they need to thrive if they get here or to a similar institution with the kinds of skills we think that they need today. So I'm going to talk about a few different ways that we do this at MIT, all of which I sort of intersect with in a number of ways. There's many other programs that exist on campus, outreach programs that are reaching out to communities local and far. I'm going to talk about a few of the ones that I'm involved in. So one of them is the teacher education program, which I've been involved in since I've come here. It's a program where we train MIT undergrads to be math and science teachers, to go out into communities around the country and perhaps around the world, to be teacher leaders who can bring new skills, can bring new ways of thinking, and can bring sort of deep knowledge of science, engineering, and mathematics into the classroom through hands-on activities, through games that they develop with the students, just through sort of their experience in labs that they've had here on campus. We don't sort of train students to be teachers. We train them to be teachers and mathematicians, scientists, engineers simultaneously, and we think that's really important. There's other programs on campus where kids are just learning to design, build, code, and share. I think the most significant of these that had the largest reach is Mitch Resnick's project Scratch, which I think he'll talk about later this afternoon, an online environment that's gotten millions of kids around the world to engage in programming, thinking, designing, creating, and sharing with each other. Similarly, Mitch and myself and Hal Abelson are involved in a project called App Inventor through the Center for Mobile Learning here, where students are learning to develop apps on mobile phones, similarly with low barriers to entry, where they can make these applications, share them with their friends and colleagues. But actually what I want to talk most today is about what the topic that Anand started, which is gaming, which is where I spend most of my time, not actually gaming, but I do spend some of my time doing that, but making and studying learning through games. And when some people think about games, they think about the salient factor being fun, that games are fun, and that's what we should try to capture. I'm not actually sure that that's it is an important factor, but I'm not sure it's the most important factor. This is a study that I was involved in through the National Academies of Science a couple years ago, thinking about computers, games, and simulations in learning science. And we look at things like it provides them with the ability to interact with systems, it gives them challenges and feedback, which are not mentioned, and it's tailored to individuals' interests. All these things are characteristics of games that we can think about the way that we characterize those same things in learning. And I think some of the misconceptions around why we sort of ascribe fun to games immediately as the first characteristic is because people have a certain conception of what a game is. So when they think of games, they think about something like this. There's a first-person shooter. There's a character on the screen. He's shooting things. That's what video games are. That's what I sort of see maybe in popular media. And we think about learning. We think, well, we're going to take that game and we're going to graft some sort of educational content in there. We're going to ask this guy how many volts he needs to kill 3 times 6 components. And I know there's some physicists in the audience here. I know it's not volts that kill, it's amps. But this is not a science game, it's a math game. But this is not what we mean by games or by learning through games. What I mean by learning through games is that it's about hard fun. This is a term that Seymour Papert coined a number of years ago at MIT. And the fact that you're doing things and you're having fun and not in spite of them being hard, but because they're hard. This is from a photo essay of faces of gamers as they're actually playing games. These are not people throwing their hands in the air, having fun all the time. They're wrestling with difficult challenges, and they're trying to solve those problems. And that's what people do in games. And so this is the way that becomes manifest in the work that we do. This is a game that my colleague Scott Osterweil designed a few years ago to teach middle school students math. And this is a game about math, but you won't see math equations on the screen, because the way that they engage with math is not through sort of memorizing and just trying to sort of feedback methods that they've learned, but really trying to deeply understand mathematical problems. So this is a vending machine problem where they need to learn about the value of money. It's something they are thrown into with no instructions, but ultimately they need to learn math through this, even if it's not formalized on the screen and formalized later in the classroom. So it's about understanding math at a deep level. Similarly, this is a game that we developed about science to teach high school students about molecular biology. And again, this is about teaching about science. We're certainly learning particular content about science, but in the process, we're trying to learn that science is playful. Science is a way of thinking about ideas and exploring new concepts. It's not, again, about memorizing particular things about particular kinds of systems, but understanding those systems in deep ways and making it playful. This is a game also, again, created by my colleague Scott Osterweil called Vanished. It was an alternate reality game. The characteristic of alternate reality games are they're games that pretend not to be games. So this was a game that was introduced by MIT students saying, we're sorry, our website was hacked. We don't know what happened. Please, if you have any information, report it on the forums for us. And in that video was encoded messages that went out to thousands of kids. Each kid got a different message. They needed to put those messages together, decrypt them, put them in order, and try to understand what was happening inside the system. And the game was about trying to understand a mystery that unfolded using science, using mathematics, and using collaboration and a lot of the tools that we think about building community of scientists and engineers. So it was about understanding how that all fits together, that it's not a sole pursuit where I sort of have the aha idea, I go to the lab, I learn something, and I write the paper, and I win the Nobel Prize, but rather it's something that's community developed, and it's a matter of understanding how that happens. The last game I'll talk about is a game that we're developing now called the Radix Endeavor. It's also known as a STEM MMO, a science, technology, engineering, mathematics, massively multiplayer online game. Hence, we just call it Radix. And Radix is a game that's being developed by my lab through funding from the Gates Foundation. And the idea is it's about sort of understanding science and math, particularly biology and 10th grade math. And you're doing it through a massively multiplayer game, again, to understand the fact that you develop knowledge as a community, not as a sole isolated task, but something you do with other people. And in the process, you're learning real science. So in this case here, it's the last one you'll see here, a little bit of genetics. So you're actually having to understand genetics. You don't get a tool that gives you knowledge of genetics, but you actually have to figure out the game and succeed in the game by actually learning genetics. And one of the things that we think is important with this is, again, developing that sense of identity. What is a scientist? What is an engineer? And how do you actually develop that identity over time? It's not something that you just sort of learn by learning stuff in a classroom where you're sort of regurgitating problems that someone's given to you, but really through practice and through participation and through community. And that's something that we want to portray in this game. So how do we know we've succeeded in this? This is actually some of the forums I mentioned from the game Vanished. And I just wanted to point out some of the things that happened at the very end of the game and some of the feedback we got from some of the students. I know it may be a little hard to read up here, but I'll try to highlight the important points here. One person said on the last one, this was a great way for me to learn science in a way that I really understood. So again, this is something that they learn as a community. They learn from each other. Another student said, I scored in the 90th percentile on my science exams, where I've scored 70s in the previous years. And to me, that also makes a big difference. So this is another way we're reaching students. And finally, I think this is the most important one. This is a student who said, someday I hope to go to MIT. And I think that's how we know we have a success, when we have students that are saying that to us. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. I want to start with an underlying theme that's coming up throughout this question of education without borders, which is arguably a false dichotomy. We've talked a little bit about education, MIT pushing out into the world, and about education and people coming to MIT. But why not both? Why not have, for example, a degree program in which students are coming from the world to MIT and going back again, not once, not a dozen times, but 30 times over 2 years? Why not engage with students who are already out in the world, particularly in corporate and organizational environments? And this was some of the things that we were thinking about at MIT Sloan when we were looking also at a dichotomy within our own mid-career programs. We've had the Sloan Fellows Program since 1931. A full-time MBA degree for people who are 35, 40, 45 years old. And for a long time, we've had part-time non-degree education, 2-day, 5-day, sometimes longer courses here at Sloan, but not granting a degree. So in 2010, after a lot of study, the Sloan faculty decided, let's try the MIT Executive MBA. Part-time, usually known as executive schedule, but granting an MBA degree. A fully rigorous program for people who are executives out in the world, people who are already successful. And that's not enough. They want more. So what does that program look like? It's a program that deliberately fosters the mission of MIT. We all know this and repeat it to ourselves before bed every night. But the objective is to serve the nation and the world. Now, how is that done? It's not just through science and technology we create here, but through the organizations that then bring those out to the world. It's a lot of the reason why there is MIT Sloan and this emphasis on developing principled, innovative leaders. The Executive MBA deliberately builds on both those missions. We are taking senior leaders, people who already have responsibility, and give them more of the skills, the perspectives, the habits of mind, the networks, so they can transform the world's organizations and institutions. These are people who matter, people who are successful, people who can do more, challenge themselves by doing more for the world. So how does this work? This is a program that's a 20-month executive schedule. Executive schedule is the term of art in the field because part-time sounds icky. Imagine 30 occasions over a 20-month period. Think of it as 5 semesters, fall, spring, summer, fall, spring. We don't give them a summer break. 30 occasions. So most of the time they're here for a weekend, which we define as Friday, Saturday, for those of you who thought a weekend was something else. And they're here every third weekend, and then once every 6 months for a full week, an executive module where you can integrate multiple courses worth of material. And we also have an international project trip. We have something called Lab, Global Organizations Lab, which students have an advisory and consulting relationship with multinational firms around the world. It's about 80% core, because of the lockstep nature of the program, because it's designed to give people full general management education while maintaining exactly the standards that you'd expect of MIT. They have all the course requirements, they have all the workload of everything you'd expect in a full-time MBA program, such as the Sloan Fellows, while they also have their own jobs, their own responsibilities. The emphases of this program are in a general management curriculum you'd want, again, from MIT and MIT Sloan, something that focuses on global leadership, on data-driven analytics, and with the MIT flavor, the MIT character you get by focus on system dynamics, invented here, and on innovation and entrepreneurship, which is in the water we drink. We also focus on learning because you're working. This touches on something that Eric was mentioning before. It's because you're doing it. Let me emphasize, there's no little e in EMBA. This is not an online program. What Anant and others do focuses on online education, and it's fantastic for that experience. For these students, some 180 students that we now have, they're coming to campus on the executive schedule, and then returning to their workplace and applying directly within their organizations, actually making it happen today. What you learn on Friday, you can apply on Monday, try it out, come back to class and report, and then do more. The teaching is all by senior faculty. We feature action learning. I mentioned Global Organizations Lab. We all have an Organizations Lab, OLab. Everything's about labs and letters. We'll eventually have a Q lab and a Z lab. We just haven't got to Qatar and Zambia yet. That we're going to have these courses allow students to practice in their own organizations and in organizations beyond. Who are these students? In the class of 2014, we've just begun, we have 114 people. The average age is 40. These are people who are genuinely in the middle of their careers. And they think that what they've learned and what they've achieved is not enough. They know a lot, they've done a lot, but they could do more. They could do more because of what MIT can equip them with. They are all 100% full-time. Roughly 1 out of 4 is a past or present entrepreneur, and I'm leaving aside those who will, within about 6 months, drink enough of the water they'll want to go do their own startups. They come from a broad spectrum of industries. You'd expect to see life sciences and technology, but we also do financial services, the government, the military, and a whole host of retail and everything else that you would expect in a very broad range, as much as possible representing the world of organizations and industries with the successful executives who were right for MIT. You see here levels of responsibility, just a quick sprout. Roughly 1 out of 4 is C-level, chief executive officer or in the C-suite. 82% have director-level responsibility or higher. The geography is very broad-ranging. This is not only a Massachusetts-based program. Roughly 45% of the current class is within easy driving distance. 55% are taking the train or flying in, and that includes people coming in from Moscow, and people coming in from Martinique, people coming in from Pakistan. They're very effective on planes. Educational backgrounds, wide range here. 2 out of 5 already hold an advanced degree, master's, even PhD level. And you see here, as you'd expect, a lot of people from science and math and engineering. That's barely more than 60%. We also have humanities and social sciences, also business and economics. Again, looking for as broad a spread as possible. Because what people are looking for in a program like this is exactly what you look for in any MIT degree program. You learn at least as much from the students around you, those who will challenge you more. They become, in this group, their professional network, but it's also their educational network. Not today only, but tomorrow as well. You see here a range of the organizations. There's many more. We're very proud, for example, that there are 3 students in the current class from various arms of GE. We also have 3 students who are physicians at Mass General, just down the street. I want to leave you with 3 thoughts about the future of education, specifically education without borders. We've been hearing a lot about who the students are, and Eric particularly was very powerful talking about the millennials. These are the parents of the millennials in this program. But that means that mid-career is mid-education. Education doesn't stop when you enter the workforce. What we're able to do with this program with others is to actually integrate people who are already out in the world so that they can do more. They can do more because of MIT. And that means they have to be able to immediately integrate mind and hand. That's what this whole applied learning is about. So it's not just saving all the stuff up in your backpack so you can use it after you graduate. It's using it on Monday. And that means that the future of education is not just about educating the leaders of the future. It's also developing today's leaders today. Thank you very much.
I want to start by thanking the 4 speakers, and I want to thank them in a particular way. And Raphael, this is for you. You know, I knew when I became Chancellor that it was a powerful title, but I didn't realize how intimidating it is because they all stayed on time wonderfully. So thank you all. Please join me in thanking them. We did want to build some time in for questions, and I believe, I'm a little blinded by the lights here, but I think there's a microphone in each of the 2 middle aisles if people would like to head to those. And while they're heading there, I'm going to start with the first question, just to let people have a chance to think about it. And I think for Eric and Anant, although others can weigh in, Eric, you talked about gaming, as did Anant, and I think a lot of people worry that if you bring games into education, it's going to be all about the fun factor, all about, you know, is the graphics engaging? And you've touched on this, but could you just amplify a little bit, you know, the notion of why that venue for this generation of students, or Anant, who apparently plays video games as well, why this actually can be a great venue for thinking about how you teach, not just about entertain?
Sure, and I think there's a number of issues here that relate to the fact that, first of all, I don't see games as a way of replacing an educational system, but it's part of an educational process. So, in fact, games are a great experience that one has, and then it's important to think about, well, how do you reflect on that experience? How do you formalize that learning? And so I think that happens as a result of using games in conjunction with face-to-face classrooms or online classrooms where you structure that. So it's not just about gaming all the time. The second thing is that it's not, as I mentioned, games sort of take on many different forms. It's not just about entertainment. And in fact, entertainment is something that we sort of put relatively low down on our list. It's really about engaging people and thinking about the way they're engaged with these things. And there's a lot of other structures of games that are becoming formalized. I have my own set of standards around things like feedback that we provide to people, goals that we provide, interesting decisions that we provide to people. Those are the important structures to games. And those are really great things, structures for learning as well. There's been a lot of research done on the parallels between the way that good games can kind of personalize and scale challenges in the way that education should do similar kinds of things. And if we can do that, we can actually make learning not just more fun, but it's more personalized. The challenges are sort of suited to the individual players or learners' abilities. And I think those are the things that we want to be thinking about from games. It also doesn't mean that, you know, we do very little work on like immersive 3D worlds. Really, our stuff is we want to provide an aesthetic for what you want to do that sort of provides a feeling for how the world should be or how the problems that are manifest in that world should feel. But this doesn't need to be high-fidelity graphics, and we find that, in fact, students are much more engaged with the ideas and concepts in them than they are with the sort of eye candy that you get from the first look of a game.
Great, thanks, Eric. We'll go to the gentleman on my left, please.
Thank you. Ted Kochanski from the class of '74. I have a problem with the idea that you can really learn a lot that's fundamental from these games and simulation type of environments. And the problem is that all simulations, and you know, we've seen examples of predictions made by simulations. It's basically extrapolating curves. They only work to the extent that you understand everything that goes into the simulation. And the real world, unfortunately, doesn't always work that way. I wrote a editorial for the IEEE a few years ago called No User Serviceable Parts Inside. And it's basically true almost everywhere now, so that people are not learning in the old way, which is taking things apart, having them break, burning things up, and things of that nature. The simulations don't really give that part of the story to the end up learning in a world it's a video game. It's a confined environment where you can fly and things like that. In the real world, when you jump off a building, you get hurt.
Somebody would you like to respond?
Sure. Yeah, happy to respond to that. I'll respond in two ways. One is that, you know, when you fly planes, when you fly on an airliner today, you know, that person that you've entrusted your life with, the life of your family to, has learned how to fly on a flight simulator for 90% of the time, or maybe 95% of the time. And then for a small fraction of the time, they get a dose of reality and they really fly the real thing. So even in classrooms, the same techniques apply. When you're teaching a course, you don't expose every little, dirty little detail of real life to a student. We use abstraction. With abstraction, we say, look, let's simplify the world, and let's learn this concept. One example is the point mass simplification in physics, where you say, look, let's assume that every object is a point. Of course, that's laughable. But, you know, physics until 11th grade is taught like that. And if you bring too much complexity too quickly, it's disastrous. So abstraction is really important. Where you present laws of various laws of nature, abstracting out a lot of the detail. But you gradually open up. It's like multiple layers of gift wrapping. You open up more and more, expose more and more to students. And you can do that beautifully in simulation. But that's not to say that there needs to be a healthy dose of reality at the end. So maybe what we do is we bring the students into classrooms and real labs and have them do some hands-on stuff towards the end.
Mongolia.
Mongolia, exactly.
Let me just add quickly two other things. So it's also important to make it clear that the assumptions and the mechanisms of any simulation or model are interpretable by the students. And I think it's actually really important for them to have a literacy in understanding what are the assumptions of this, what are the limitations of this particular model. And that's up to the designer to sort of make that transparent. And in other cases, as some of the work we do, we actually have students actually do some of the coding or look at some of the coding behind some of the simulations. So they develop a literacy in understanding how those work. Even if they can't necessarily code them from scratch, they should understand what the mechanisms are that are operating behind them.
Great, thanks. Gentleman on my right.
John Chisholm, Northern California. A consequence of the faster and faster pace of innovation, technology, knowledge, is that a smaller and smaller percent of what will be important for us to know 10 years from now can be taught to us now. And a smaller percentage of what the young folks at MIT today who are in class will be, what they're learning today will represent a smaller percentage of what's important for them 30 years ago than from when I was at MIT 30 years ago from what I learned back then. Putting it another way, the flow of information that you enjoy or get throughout life and knowledge is increasingly more important than the stock of information that you gain in the 4 years when you're in college, if you follow me. And if this is true, it would seem like it would suggest a new kind of education in which, rather than 4 concentrated years of learning between the ages of 18 and 21, we maybe have an initial couple of years during that time or some period of time, and then an ongoing recurring exposure to education, maybe a few weeks every year for the next 10 years, which would better capture all of this flow of learning rather than an initial stock of learning. I haven't heard anything along those lines today. What are your thoughts? Thanks.
Jonathan. Well, so it's a nice question. What the executive MBA tries to do, and what Sloan's trying to do also with the non-degree education, is making that assumption that education doesn't stop when you finish with undergraduate or perhaps immediately proceeding on to graduate school. Making that assumption means bringing people back to the classroom after they've been out because they're out. So rather than shaving or compressing the undergraduate degree, just assuming that that's not terminal, even for people who are not planning to go on to graduate study in physics and science and such. So it's not a reshaping of the undergraduate model, but it's an extending of the education model.
I just absolutely love your idea. It's radical, and I think it's awesome, and I think the leaders here should listen. It'd be fantastic to think of a new class of education system where students come in for 2 years. Here we think we know what they need to know for the next 100 years. For 5 years or 7 years or 10 years for PhD students. Your idea is brilliant. Have them come in here for 2 years, teach them how to learn, teach them some basic facts, and then you go out into the world and they have continuing online learning, where already a number of alumni of MIT are getting back in touch and say, wow, this course was not taught this way before. Everything is new. So I'm relearning things that I need. I think it's a great idea. 2 years undergraduate degree program, and then you go out into the world and you have a continual stream of learning. I think it's brilliant.
Amy, do you want to add anything just from your perspective of what you see when students do in fact go out into the world and come back?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you talked about students learning to learn, and I think the other thing they need to do is learn to create, and because we don't want just to be learning the knowledge that's already existing, and I think that's one of the things that worked with a lot with our students is the idea of co-creation, and that what they gain in the field, very much they bring back, and it influences where they continue and what they do next. And I think that's exactly what you're referring to, right? Is it this idea of going and engaging with the world, getting experiences, learning from that, creating new interventions, learning from that, and continuing. And I also am intrigued by the idea and think it would be a wonderful thing. So I think thank you for your perspective.
And I will point out to our president, we've just changed our tuition policies in an interesting way here, but thank you for the suggestion. Gentleman on my left.
Tom Kadala. I'm a parent of a junior here at MIT. Also an edX student, which I have to commend Professor Rao for what he's done. Anybody here who's interested, I think it's phenomenal. The question I have is I'm just thinking out and just seeing like hundreds of thousands of people having taken edX. None of them have probably stepped on the MIT campus. They've earned something, piece of paper. They've learned at gaming, and then of course you have to think people who game also game a system. So, and the system, I'll go over to the other side and say, perhaps some of those MBAs going back to their jobs, there's a career fair going on today, as probably some of you know, and the standards there haven't changed. So they're going to say, if you've been to MIT for 4 years, suddenly somebody shows up and says, well, I did edX, and so what is that? And somebody might game that system. So I'm trying to figure out, what is MIT going to look like, or what is the college campus going to look like as these numbers begin to increase? You've done the spring, you're now doing the fall, a few more years of this, we'll have hundreds of thousands of people passing this course. What does that do to MIT, or the student that comes to MIT that's stuck in this 4-year program that perhaps should be a 2-year program, and so on and so forth? But
Do you want me to take first shot at that? And if you want to add? It's a great question, and I want to stress a couple of points. If we thought that an MIT education was just about knowledge acquisition, what information do you gather, then the online tools would have a tremendous power, and we could really think about, what are all the other pieces that we do here. But similar to the previous question, so much of what you learn in an MIT education, what that degree gives you is all the things that happen outside the classroom. It's doing mediation, it's doing team building, it's learning how to communicate, it's learning how to interact, it's learning how to do the real world experiences on top of all the other pieces. So while there's certainly a value to that edX experience, and I'm glad you did it, I assume you came away with the feeling that you got something out of it, we've, I think, been very careful to distinguish between the edX experience and an MIT experience. We want our students on campus to build all the things that they do outside the classroom as well as what they gain inside the classroom. And our goal is to use those online tools to strengthen what happens inside the classroom to build those other pieces. So we certainly hope that those folks who do an edX experience will be stronger. They've had a taste of an MIT experience, and I think Anant can tell you that some of them discovered that MIT's hard. Not necessarily anything wrong with that. But at the same time, those students that do come to 02139 gain an additional component that comes from the things they do with each other in this setting. And I don't think we're going to lose that when we go to the online kind of experience. Anant, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I think Eric said it beautifully. I think the experience is very different, and I think, so you may ask, why are we doing this experiment? The keyword is experiment. It's an experiment. It's the first time that we are applying technology to learning in a concerted manner. And we have technology in our name. And so we are applying technology to learning, and it's a worldwide experiment. MIT's mission says it's not just about a nation, it's about the world. So what is education going to look like in 50 years? What part, how do we as MIT play a part in it? We want to be driving the change. We want to influence the change. We want to invent the next campus. We want to invent the future. And so I think it's all part of that experiment.
50 years from now?
So I think, I can tell you what the campus will look like is already looking like this fall and next spring because of online learning. A number of classes are already using the edX platform on our campuses. to give students instant feedback on exercises, to use virtual simulation in the classroom, to allow students to do the laboratories from the comfort of their own pajamas. And I think that there's a number of such things we'll bring back immediately, and those things are coming back right now. In the longer term, 50 years from now, who knows? I'm really enamored by the previous idea. Maybe we change how I'm just dreaming here. Maybe they come in for a couple of years, and then the remaining 2 years are a credit against the next 50 years, and there's continuing learning through online. I don't know what the world is going to look like, but we need to be doing that experiment.
So I guess I'll be paying a tuition bill for the next 50 years, is that?
But in smaller chunks, not to worry. I think we have time for 2 more questions, and I see 2 more gentlemen. I'm going to go to the gentleman in the red jacket first.
Yes, obviously, Daryl Briggs, class of '57, and that in the red jacket, I'm sure makes me a curmudgeon. But my question really is the changes that all of these things are really occurring, at least to me, is you're breaking down the smokestacks within MIT, where you don't really recognize that you're all using the same sorts of equations. You don't catch that until you get out in the world, and maybe even then you don't do it, to find out that the same math works a whole bunch of different places. And once you recognize that, you can be very creative, because you can get into some areas that, by using that, because somebody already proves the math works, in some other field. But where I got that epiphany, actually, was the very simple thing is that the course 6 uses J and course 18 uses I. Think about that. And my epiphany was that I had an M351 class immediately before or after a stability theory class on course 6. And I said, wait a minute. I was using the same equations in both rooms. I really didn't need to spend 2 hours that way, because I got the same math. And once you start applying that, you can use things across the board. And I think this could be an unintended consequence, perhaps, or maybe it's an intended one, with the games and those kinds of things, because it's forcing you into thinking in other fields or whatever, and seeing that subconsciously, the same processes are working here, there, and everywhere. And in the game, you've got to be moving fast, so you're moving from one field to another. Anyway, that's just thoughts from the curmudgeon world.
Thank you. Anybody like to respond quickly to it? I would simply observe that I think what you see on this campus is that, in fact, we are breaking down the barriers, that we're using the same ideas across disciplines, and that's true in the things that Amy does in Dlab, that we see in Eric's work. And we actually think that idea helps our students, because they don't go, oh, this is an electrical engineering class, I must hate it. Sorry, Raphael. As opposed to, this is a math class, I must like it. Those cross-purposes things are actually, we think, a plus.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it was an intended or unintended consequence, but it's one of those unintended consequences which is very positive.
Yes.
There's a specific initiative on campus using a wiki to have students and faculty sort of start to make those links across courses, so that the faculty, because sometimes faculty aren't aware that there's people using sort of very similar things in other courses, and the idea is to sort of be able to create a community that helps make some of these linkages across courses on campus.
Well, it was my theory that back in the day, that's how the professors in the various courses protected their smokestacks.
We're taking care of that. Thank you. If it's a short question, we've got time for it. Please.
Be brief. I'm Bob Schaffel from class of '71. There's a dimension here which has been alluded to, which is the multicultural diversity, which is a part of the education of the future. I work for an international organization, and there's some days, given the breadth of geography that's represented by my co-workers, where I go screaming into my pillow at night because they don't understand my point of view. And there are other days I realize that the way they work actually enriches my own creativity. When I hear about the opening bringing MIT to the world, bringing the world to MIT. There's this implicit understanding that there's now an opportunity not just to have us not lose the interaction, but to work with it more explicitly. How can you do that with the gaming? What thoughts have you given to the gaming in the online world so that this multicultural diversity actually becomes an active part of the future, not just something that happens to be there we don't want to lose?
Anand, and I think Amy, I'm sure you're going to have something about Anand. If you could just talk about your experience.
Sure, I think, we didn't have to do anything at all, and we see a lot of that. So on the discussion forum with homeworks, and we saw students from New Zealand, Pakistan, India, Colombia, USA, Egypt, working together on problem sets. And I just go to bed, not screaming into my pillow, but dreaming into my pillow that what is the world going to look like 10 years from now, where we have this new cadre of students that are growing up, having collaborated, on problem sets, MIT hard, and Harvard easy problem sets. That was a joke. What's going to happen 10 years from now when these students grow up having collaborated? We have other ideas where we haven't done that yet, but we've been thinking about it. We have a wiki where students can put the laboratory dashboard on the wiki, and students around the world can collaborate in a gaming environment to solve some things. In fact, there's a joke. One student put the wiki on the wiki and was drawing some stuff and had a design. And he came back an hour later and he said, "You have a bug in your system. The design changed under me." We told him, "Silly, this is a collaborative environment. Somebody else from somewhere else, was designing along with you. Go figure." So I think this is happening already.
Be extracted from it so that you not only have it happening, which is a really great thing, but also that there's something MIT can learn from by bringing some critical thinking to the analysis of how it's happening, so that can be improving the games, the experience, and the educational from this dimension also.
And if I can just close on that, I would say, indeed, one of the things we intend to do, and many of my colleagues here are already doing, is looking at the research on learning and how do we build on this. And this multicultural component of it, I know, is in the minds of many of the folks that we want to deal with. I want to, in the interest of time, sorry, I need to move on. So I would like to simply say, we are delighted you joined us for this first session. We're happy, in particular, to have so many of the participants of the Alumni Leadership Conference and the Corporate Development Committee annual meeting with us today. We're going to take a short break from the symposium, and I'm going to ask you, if you can, to be back at 10:30. And for those of you registered with ALC and CDC sessions starting at 10:30, we'll see you this afternoon at the inauguration. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to give a little opening remarks on the background of the panel, and then I'll introduce our 4 distinguished speakers. So today, this panel will focus on the unique aspects of an MIT on-campus educational experience, and we've heard some discussion this morning on this. And as you'll see through their presentations, they'll demonstrate the great value of our residential experience. In 1998, a presidential task force on student life and learning set forth a pioneering framework consisting of an integrated educational triad, equal parts academics, research, and community. In true MIT fashion, this was a concept that was originated from a student advisory committee, something I've become very familiar with. In achieving this educational triad, the physical campus geographically lies at the epicenter of the MIT residential experience. However, it only serves as a scaffold. The true core exists in the people of MIT, the remarkable faculty, students, and staff who are mixed together vigorously, densely, and often spontaneously. The community of MIT is surrounded by a stimulating and enabling environment of state-of-the-art instrumentation, fabrication laboratories, design studios, interconnected spaces for informal learning and experimentation. The result is a lighthouse of creativity, inspiration, collaboration, diversity, debate, rigor, and a very interesting and novel and different approach to critical thinking that shines brightly around the world. In short, as you've heard from many throughout the inauguration festivities, MIT is a home. It's a home with a collective character, heart, and spirit. It's a place where anything seems possible. While historically we have focused on preparing our students to go out and have a positive impact on the world after graduation. Today, the integration of the residential with the global and virtual has enabled our students to be so ubiquitously connected, engaged, and interacting with each other, the MIT community, our extended family of alumni, and with society at large. They're no longer waiting. As Dean for Graduate Education, I have the privilege to witness the transformative and far-reaching global impact of our students every single day while they're still here at MIT. And we've seen some of that this morning. Hence, I can only imagine their potential and what they will achieve after they graduate. And as you can see, we are committed to taking on the challenge to continually raise the bar and explore new modes of innovative, inspiring, and increasingly effective education by integrating the residential with a new set of enormous opportunities presented by the global and virtual. Our new president, Rafael Reif, has made significant contributions in each of these areas, and his optimism, open mind, will lead us into this completely new age of education. So I'm just going to end, before I introduce our four speakers, by quoting a recent article in the Tech, which is something I don't do often. A student, Debbie Liu, who is a cross-registered student, she's a Harvard student, cross-registered at MIT, wrote an article, and many of you may have seen this, a love letter to MIT. And I quote her, "It's you, MIT, that has made the biggest impact in my life, academically, socially, and personally. You have made yourself an open playground. You allowed me to conduct my senior thesis research through UROPS. Your professors open their arms to all students, regardless of whether they enroll or are getting a degree at MIT. I love you for hosting numerous contests to support your students in becoming innovators and entrepreneurs. I love you for being an open university, literally and figuratively, providing free access to knowledge like OpenCourseWare and now edX. If you only remember one thing, just know that you have touched more lives than you can recognize." So with that, I'll introduce our four speakers just briefly. So our first speaker, Rosalind H. Williams, is the Byrne-Dibner Professor of History and Science and Technology, and she will talk on MIT culture, the future as past. Our second speaker, J. Kim Vanderveer, is the Dean for Undergraduate Research and Professor of Mechanical and Ocean Engineering, who will talk on Europe and the culture of a can-do and the development of a can-do culture. Our third speaker, Sanjay Sarmar, Professor of Mechanical Engineering and Director of MIT SUTD Collaboration on Fostering Future Leaders. And lastly, Catherine Drennan, Professor of Chemistry and Biology and Professor and Investigator, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, on Is the Lecture Becoming Extinct or Simply Evolving? Welcome to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been asked to open this session by talking about MIT culture as it relates to the future of MIT on-campus education. The word culture is foggy. It is everywhere and nowhere. It's everywhere because it's a default explanation for anything that happens. You can say it's because of culture, our MIT culture in particular. But it's also unreal. It's kind of ghostly. It's everywhere and nowhere. So I'm trying to talk about culture in a more pragmatic and limited way. And that is as culture is habits that are constructed over time, habits of mind and behavior. And you laugh over it. Wait a minute. Oh. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the iconic, our esteemed founder, the founder of MIT. The fact that he's so often hacked is part of our culture, I think. So the point I'm trying to make by going back to Rogers is that we're always starting from somewhere when we go into the future. We're always coming from somewhere. Because culture, I would define as habits constructed over time. These are habits of thought, habits of behavior. They evolve, they are not static, but they are persistent. And actually, if you want a great description of MIT culture, where it comes from, where it's headed, all you have to do is go back to the sesquicentennial celebration of 2011. It was one long essay about MIT culture. And the theme was especially well captured, I think, in the book edited by my STS colleague, David Kaiser, for the 150th. And it's titled Becoming MIT. And the subtitle is Moments of Decision. And that idea that culture is built through decisions is what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to take 4 examples of key decisions that have defined and built MIT culture. And so the first has to do with our friend William Barton Rogers. This is probably the most familiar photograph of him, but as I say, it's part of MIT culture to make fun of our monuments. This man made a crucial decision, and that is to found this institute of which he dreamed in Boston. Now, he was from Virginia, his family was from Virginia, but he made the decision to found the institute in Boston after he visited here. His brother was already here. On one of his visits, he met Emma Savage. This is a picture of Rogers in the back with Emma, who would become his wife, and 2 members of her prominent Boston family. I'm sure that's one of the reasons he was attracted to Boston, but I want to read you what he said about this area in contrast to slaveholding, less industrial, and more violent Virginia. And I speak as a Virginian, but he felt that Boston was very different. He wrote his brother, "Ever since I have known something of the knowledge-seeking spirit and the intellectual capabilities of the community in and around Boston, I have felt persuaded that of all places in the world, it was the one most certain to derive the highest benefits from a polytechnic institution, of all the places in the world." And we at MIT should never forget how much we owe to Boston culture. That was one decision. The second example, second decision. This is William H. Walker, and this is not Francis Walker of Walker Memorial, but William H., who partnered with A.D. Little before 1900, and is arguably the founder of chemical engineering in this country. So I want to show you, now this is you can't read this, but I will read the important parts. This is a manuscript that Walker wrote after he left MIT in the 1920s, and he's reflecting back on his educational innovations earlier in the 20th century. He's writing in this top paragraph about how the chemistry curriculum was set up to offer options, as they were called, and I quote, that cater to the demand of the industries that they should be supplied with men who had become expert in special lines of work peculiar to that certain industry. Experience taught me that this was all wrong. What an industry needed was not a man that had been taught what that industry already knew, but rather a man who was trained to do what that industry had not been able to do. And then the top of the second paragraph, he says, to prove the soundness of this idea, I returned to MIT in 1903, and after a hot fight with both the chemical and engineering faculties, I reconstructed Course 10 as a general educational course without options. I love that hot fight. That's so MIT, that feistiness, that aggression. I mean, if you go over the edge, it can be destructive, but that is an energy and a fearlessness that is creative. He was willing to take on the industry and the faculties to do what he thought was right in designing Course 10. So, a third example of cultural choices made at MIT, and that's where we are now. Kresge Auditorium is a special place, and this is where you see culture not just figuratively, but literally built. Now it's part of the landscape, but when Kresge was going up with a chapel nearby, I mean, it looks like a futuristic landscape in the midst of the old Industrial Revolution. But you know what's most important, I think, about Kresge is the sign over the door that you may have noticed when you came in, that this is the meeting house of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the meeting house. That's not futuristic. That goes deep into the human past. That has religious overtones, community. That's the deep past of humanity. The decision to build this meeting house is a cultural declaration. That it's one MIT, one community together in service. And the last example I have has to do with who belongs to this community. I'm sure you noticed when I read that quote from Walker, he talks about men doing this. That has changed. That is part of the culture that has changed. And this, I love this graph. I love it. You want to see cultural innovation. You want to see innovation. That's innovation. Forget technology. That's innovation. This is a percent chart, and this is an absolute number chart with both graduate and undergraduate women. This shows cultural change. It also shows continuity in that MIT is constantly opening itself up to rethinking who belongs here, who needs this education, who do we serve. So I just want to end on this note of cultural innovation and reminding you that the really important and deep innovations are cultural, not technological. And the two big challenges to the future of higher education in which MIT is involved are socioeconomic. They're not technical, they're socioeconomic. One is the cost of higher education. New technologies may lower that cost. But I am also aware that there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to make money off of the new technologies. So it is not a given that technological innovation will lower the cost of higher ed. We need to keep our eye on the prize, on the ball here. The other challenge to education today is one of inclusion, being open to all students from all backgrounds. The prospect of new legal restrictions on our ability to make these decisions, or the ability of any university to make these decisions, is very real. It's interwoven with financial barriers, but it's not the same thing. So MIT needs to keep thinking about these challenges, figuring out how technology can help address them, but not confusing the two. So the future of MIT education on campus and our leadership at this moment of decision depends on what we declare MIT culture is at this point, who it is for, what the education is for, and what kind of education and culture we are building here. Thank you.
I'm going to reflect on the impact that Europe has had on MIT and how that might be used to guide us as we look to the future of education. We're proud of the fact that the graduating class of 2012, 87% of them did at least one Europe in the time that they were here. Said another way, since the year 2000, 28,000 students have done Europs. It hasn't always been that way. And I'm going to reflect on some of the past to see if we can take some lessons from how we got started and arrive to where we are at today. So Ed Land gave a talk in 1957 in which he was rather critical of the lecture problem set quiz mode of education. He advocated that students ought to learn by doing projects, and he proposed that there should be faculty mentors for every student. And then, it's 1957, not much happened. Until he followed up with a gift in 1968, the income from a trust that generated $1 million of income each year for 5 years, he gave to MIT to promote developments in undergraduate education. And that trust then, the money was used to sponsor new activities in education. The people who decided on what to invest in was basically a selection committee, Jerry Wiesner, Ben Snyder, Walter Rosenblith, Gerald Zacharias, and Paul Gray, who was associate provost at the time. Among the first things that they invested in were UROP, the Experimental Study Group, and Concourse, all still very much in existence today. And the founding director of UROP was Margaret McVicker, who was had just come off a postdoc and was an instructor in physics at the time. Paul told me she began with one rule, and that is no bottle washing. What the students did had to be worthy of academic credit. And so with a $50,000 grant, UROP began. So I'm going to reflect, mostly you're going to hear, my comments are through my eyes. I came to MIT in 1968 as a grad student, joined the faculty in 1975. My first interactions with UROP, I was doing field experiments in the summer of 75, 76, 81. I took UROPs up to Castine, Maine, 4 to 6 weeks. We got up before dawn, we worked after dark, we got mosquito bites and cold, but the students delivered. I learned great lessons from that. Moving on, I became the director of ESG, one of those groups that was funded by Ed Land's gift, in 1984. And I learned a lot from my students at ESG. I had 2 freshmen that first year. Their name was Seth Brown and Maria Lieberman. And they came to me as sophomores. They came back to tutor at ESG, and they said, there's a problem. Freshmen can't get UROPs in chemistry because they have no laboratory experience, and we'd like to fix that. We want to teach a course. We're going to call it Chemistry Demystified. Will you support us in doing that? So they worked all summer long. They taught this 9-unit subject, which was a phenomenal success. It led to the creation of brown bag chemistry kits, which were used by students in the regular curriculum for a few years. And it also led to something else. At that time, math and physics were taught at ESG, but the chemistry department didn't trust ESG to teach chemistry. And by the end of Chemistry Demystified, the students were able to convince the dean at the time, Gene Brown, and the department head that ESG should be able to teach chemistry, and it's taught chemistry ever since. Moving on, I was Doc Edgerson's TA in 1972, 73. And when he died in 1990, the family had put a committee together, and they came to MIT and they asked a lot of us what would be an appropriate legacy to Doc. And in addition to the preservation of all the phenomenal photographs, I said the reason students and colleagues love Doc is because he was so supportive when someone came to him and said, I've always wanted to try the following experiment or something. And Doc would say, well, there's a workbench, there's a soldering iron, what are you waiting for? And so the idea for the Edgerton Center was born. And the Edgerton Center was founded 2 years later in 1992. We're 20 years old now. And it was founded with the goal of being a place where students with individual projects and things they wanted to work on would be supported. We started off, one of the first things we did was supporting hand students with, who wanted to join clubs like the Solar Electric Vehicle Team. UROP has been phenomenally successful, and in 1999, after I started the Edgerton Center, Chancellor Larry Bacow came to me and he said, I'd like you to be the next faculty director of UROP, the first one after Margaret McVicker's passing. That was a beautiful combination, I thought, because it would give me the opportunity to support students through UROP and support them with the physical resources of the Edgerton Center. So lots of student clubs and teams started to form and be supported by the Edgerton Center. But I was now the Dean for Undergraduate Research. you don't mess with a good thing. Europe had been really successful, but I did make one small tweak, and that was I made it more possible for students who wanted to work on individual projects to be able to be supported by Europe. And a lot of those students ended up doing their projects while they were members of these teams. And then in about 2000, 2001, another extraordinary student came to me. She was a grad student. You heard her this morning, Amy Smith, another extraordinary student with a big idea. She wanted to teach a subject called Designs for the Developing World, and could she do it at the Edgerton Center? So not long after, she did, it was a big success. Not long after, I hired her at the Edgerton Center, and Dlab was born. Dlab is now celebrating its 10th year. We're in newly renovated space up at N51. And as you heard all the wonderful things that Dlab is now doing this morning. Here's a picture of Amy on the right there, getting covered by mud, drilling wells in Ghana. But it wasn't all easy in the beginning. Amy, in that first year, we had to figure out a way to cover her salary, so she also was the advisor to the student clubs and teams and taught the engineering design part of the MITES program in the summer times. So I'm going to just give you 3 quick vignettes of students and how Europe has affected them and give you something from as they see it in their words. The first one is Neil Robertson. He was an alum of '96, and about year 2000, we got an email at the Europe office. Michael Bergman got it, and followed up by a phone call. And Neil had recently sold his .com company that he had started for a lot of money, and he wanted to do something to pay back and to support Europe. And he ultimately made a big gift that went into the endowment. And when I had a chance to sit down and talk with him, I said, what was it about Europe that you felt that was important to you? He said, I would not be here today. I would not have been able to do that company if it hadn't been for my Europe experience. My first faculty supervisor, when he went to ask for that Europe, said, well, can you program in C? And he said no. And he said, well, it doesn't matter. You'll learn it and pick it up in a couple of weeks. And he went on to do several more Europes. And what he said was really important about the Europes was the confidence that he got in the ability to take on a new problem, unknown answer, and just do it. And he said, that's why I want to give something to make sure Europe continues here at MIT. Jackie Sly, classic student story. If any of you have been a freshman advisor and asked them, why do you come to MIT? Probably one of the most frequent answers is because I heard about Europe. She heard about Robotuna and Mike Trianofilou's work. She wanted to come and work on marine vehicles. And she came to MIT. She's now done 4 or 5 Europes as a member of the marine robotics team. She also believes in paying back. This is just this summer with one of my staff, Ed Moriarty, up in Ketchikan, Alaska. They taught middle school and high school students how to do underwater vehicles, something called a glider in this case. The third one I want to talk about is Ben Judge. He's another typical case. In this quote here, he said, I was destroyed by my first couple of courses at MIT. Not an unusual thing. He said, after taking EC 721, the wheelchair design course, he said it all of a sudden began to click for him. And his studies had meaning. He started being successful. He's done 4 or 5 Europes working with Amos Winter doing wheelchairs. And he's now a graduate student, still working on wheelchairs, and he's with me in Singapore at the SUTD. So Europe has opened the doors so that lots of things have happened. Clubs and teams, public service fellowships. And if I wanted to take away from this is that what I've learned over these 38 years that I've overlapped with Europe is to when students, earnest students come in with a big idea, support them, give them the resources, and get out of the way. So if there's something we can, I think, can learn learn that'll help us going forward is to remember the incredible resources that our students bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you. When I joined MIT in 1996 as a young professor from Berkeley, I was very struck by the logo. There is a man with a sledgehammer on our logo. And it really identified for me something very special about MIT, which is academics is a lot about studying, but what MIT really empowers is action. And that's really the theme behind the few words I'm going to say today. If you rethink the philosophical statement, it is this love affair with actually doing something, having an idea and somehow magically appear in real life. And that empowerment is what makes us special. We take it for granted, but it's very special. And really nothing captures it better than a technology like 3D printing, right? I mean, that's the ultimate. That's straight out of Star Trek. I think, and therefore it is. And Ellie Sachs, who invented this, had this almost maniacal ability to think about things and somehow make it happen. And MIT is full of folks like that, and that's what makes us very special. And it is in our mission, it runs in our blood, and there are 3 steps to it. One is you have a thought, then we implement it, you have an artifact, but then there's a 3rd element to it, which makes leaders, which is to scale. And it is the scaling that makes MIT what it is today. And I put up 4 examples in my next slide. Actually, the first example is Amy Smith, who had an idea, and she achieved it. She has done something that was, if someone had asked, or if you were asked, if I were asked 10 years ago, is this possible, I would have said no. But she made it happen. 3 other examples. Drew Houston, who founded Dropbox, which I used this morning, actually, right? And is another example of an incredible product and an incredible idea that he brought to life. We have leaders, we've produced leaders, we continue to produce leaders, and that is in our DNA. Sal Khan, who has started, as you know, a movement in education that, again, started from an idea, and he made it happen, it scaled, and it's successful. He is a leader. Adam Goldstein is actually my advisee, and in fact, I just met him yesterday. And let me shamelessly plug his company, Hipmunk, which I think is the best travel website. And I remember a year before he graduated, he said, Sanjay, I have this idea. I'm going to create a company, a better travel website. And I said to him, what about all the other travel websites? He says, no, mine's going to be better. And sure enough, there are articles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal about what he thought about, and he made it happen. And it says, I'm slightly religious. But not if we listen to the stereotypes, and the stereotypes associated with academia are not flattering, right? I mean, think about it. Analysis paralysis. It's academic is an insult. It's academic, that means this conversation is over, right? The ivory tower. Of course, nerds and geeks. The geeks might inherit the earth, but not if we listen to what the world says about us geeks. But we need to think about it. Maybe a little bit of introspection isn't such a bad idea. If you look, this is from the 2010 senior survey. So if you look at the first line, it says, select scholarly or professional information from a variety of sources. And our students are harsh, they judge us harshly as we them, because they expect us to be very good. But they give us good marks. In fact, let's take the 3rd one. Deliver on all elements of a difficult job or project you agree to do within the accepted time frame. We get good marks. But when it comes to the one thing that makes us so special, we don't get good marks. And this, I think, we can change. Now, our students do well, but let's make them do better. And I think that this is a challenge for education as we go forward, not just in MIT, but I think everywhere. And let's again ask the question, analysis versus paralysis. And this is a little bit controversial, it's a little bit anecdotal, but I just wanted to make a point here. Analysis paralysis is a bad word, but do we really use analysis to benefit success? Or do we unintentionally cause paralysis? That's a question I asked myself as I drew this slide. So academia is a mountain. We take our students atop it. We train our students to do really well. There's a bit of a chasm, and the other side is industry. And we're really good at training our students and bringing them to the very edge of that mountain, right? They're awesome. They're really great. But I teach a number of classes at MIT. One of them is dynamics, and so I'll critique myself here. When I teach dynamics, my students, when they enter the class, they enter with uncluttered minds. There's almost a naive optimism. And then I start teaching them second order and third order effects, like the Coriolis force, which is my favorite topic. Now, am I teaching Coriolis force in a way that empowers them, or that causes them to come to that cliff and stop and hesitate? Perhaps they were better off with their uncluttered minds. Maybe I just cluttered it. Did I teach the Coriolis force in a way that they would actually forget and just create doubt when they had an opportunity to do something new? And that's a question I've always struggled with. If I teach it right, and I know I have a long way to go to improve, I should teach the second order effect, not to inhibit the first order insight on which all intuition and success is based. I should teach it to support it, where the second order confirms the first order, not impede it. And I think that this leap of faith that it takes to create something new and what makes our students special, I think that I certainly have found myself unintentionally impeding it in order to justify the second order stuff I want to teach. It's not good enough to just learn dynamics, just basic lump mass. You need to know this stuff, right? And this stuff they forget, but the doubt lingers. This is a critique of myself, and I wonder if this is something that we do. How do we teach in such a way that the second order analysis supports decisions and supports positive, optimistic choices rather than potentially creating paralysis? So this is my constant struggle. Now, we do a lot at MIT. We're a great school, and so my provocative statements shouldn't be interpreted as being negative. I'm very proud of what we achieve. We connect to the tangible. We emphasize design. We empower action. We heard about the Europes. We heard about the history of MIT. There's no doubt about it. This picture I thought was wonderful. It's a romance of a young designer with an artifact he made from a class that David Wallace in the Department of Mechanical Engineering teaches. And that's, I think, a beautiful picture. That is the romance that makes MIT special. This is the electric vehicle team's motorbike, electric motorcycle, that I participated in the Isle of Man race and placed fourth. This was developed by our students and Europe's, right? I mean, again, something we're very proud of. I think there's no doubt that we do a great job. The question I ask is, do we celebrate it enough? And do we tell our students? How many of our students know this? How many of our students know that 2 presidents around the world were MIT undergraduates or graduate students? How many of us tell our students about success and about vision and doing something special? And how much do we encourage our students to make leaps of faith and do something that might be impossible? Or do we just teach them to hold back? We are now taking a step beyond not just our own borders, but also the borders of our country, and we're helping establish, as we have in the past, new universities. The Singapore University of Technology and Design, which is an effort that I'm deeply involved in, Kim is deeply involved in, is an effort by us to take what is special in our DNA, to take what is special in MIT and replicate elsewhere. But I think it's also given certainly many of us cause to introspect and think about what makes us special. And what we're discovering is there's a lot that makes us special. And this wheel captures some of it. You heard about Europe, you've heard about Dlab, you've heard about MITRES. I don't know how many of you know about MITRES, but I recommend at some point visiting the MITRES facility near the museum. Of course, we have UPOP, we have the Garden Engineering Leadership Program, and over the last 10 years, or 15 years, we've evolved some really great efforts to encourage entrepreneurship, everything from the Deshpande Center to the Trust Center, the Legatum Center. We have wonderful competitions As that young lady in the love letter that Christine read out mentioned, we have terrific classes, but I think the criticism I would have, and I think an opportunity for the future, is it cannot be an afterthought. I think it needs to run deep in our blood, and we need to tell our students that in the future, in fact, I think our students of the future will not just have knowledge and skills, but will come packaged with the right attitude to become leaders. And I think this is a tradition that MIT needs to continue. We have, of course, nearly 26,000 companies, as many of you know, MIT has created, something like 3 million jobs, $2 trillion of annual revenues worldwide created by MIT companies. These are things that we need to celebrate, I believe, and infuse into every student's DNA before they graduate. And I believe this is going to be a challenge and an opportunity for the future. Thank you very much.
So I'm tasked this morning with talking about the classroom lecture. So to frame this discussion of whether the classroom lecture is going extinct or simply evolving, I'll share with you a pro and con list that biology graduate students in TA training came up with. So in terms of advantages, they said that the lecture is a practical way of conveying material to a large number of people. The list of disadvantages, as one might guess, were longer. And these included that it's a passive way of communicating material. And if you want to really teach the material, you want to engage the students. They also told me that it's hard for the lecturer to tell if people are actually understanding the material that you're presenting. And also for the people in the room, if they're confused, they may not know, am I the only one confused or is no one getting this? So that's another disadvantage. You can't tailor to the individual. They also said that there are a lot of people in a big lecture classroom that have a lot of diverse interests. So how do you engage all these people who may not be interested in the topic that you're teaching for their major? And also, there's usually 1 or 2 lecturers, and so that is the only data points that students have as to what scholars in the field look like. I'm the only chemist on this panel, so now you all think that all chemists look like me. All right, so what can we do to address this? So what I'm going to tell you about today is a 5-year study of the freshman chemistry lecture. And for those of you who speak MIT, that's 511.1 that we've been studying. And we've been applying selective pressures to this lecture and seeing if we can evolve the lecture. And this requires a team, and my team is shown up here. The team requires people to teach freshman chemistry, and so we have instructors here. It also requires someone who can help us analyze the data on whether what we're doing is working. And that person for us is Rudy Mitchell from the Teaching and Learning Laboratory with a PhD in education rather than chemistry. And as you'll see at the end, it also required a filmmaker who actually happens to have a bachelor's degree from MIT in chemistry and an artist who has a PhD in chemistry from MIT as well. So this is our team. And let me tell you about the experiments and then the data. And what I hope the data will show you is that we can evolve the classroom lecture for the better. If it is going extinct, we should try to save it because it's worth saving. All right, so I'm going to show you some experiments and show you some data because this is MIT and so we want data. All right, so here's the experiment. We applied selective pressure. One thing we did was use educational technology. It's MIT, we should use technology. And this technology is a clicker. This clicker is the size of a credit card, and you can ask a question in lecture and then give students choices, and they can click in with their little device what answer they think is correct. So you can lecture, stop the lecture, and say, OK, let's see if you can think about this material and tell me which of these is correct. So students can be engaged, and the professor can see if most people get the right answer, if everyone's with them. And the students may say, most people said this. I was down here in this 10%. Maybe I'd better do a little bit more homework in this class. So it allows them to evaluate how they're doing. So what was our result from using clicker technology? Well, what we found is that how you use clickers is really important in terms of the gains that you get. So we tried a lot of things, and I'm going to give you the bottom line of what worked best. And the bottom line was to introduce clicker competitions. Well, what is this? All right, so in a big classroom, you have a lot of recitations, often 5 to 10 recitations. And what we would do every Friday in lecture is have a competition between those recitations. And so they would have questions to answer, and the winning recitation that got the most number right would be displayed at the end of the class, and everyone would applaud. At the end of the semester, you would have a final clicker competitions, and the overall winner would get a Geeky Chemistry t-shirt. All right, so here we evaluated how well this worked. We had a control, which was using clickers but without the competition, and the treatment, which is the use of the clicker competitions. And so we asked students, the percent that agreed with the statement, that during class they were stimulated to think. The control group, 36%, versus the treatment, 82%. 36% said that they, in the control, were stimulated to think. That's a little depressing, but the 82 number is really good. All right, helped identify weaknesses. We also saw a big gain with the clicker competitions, and enjoyment, 35 to 67. Students liked it a lot better when we had the competitions. So some people have said to me, Kathy, you and your clickers, I tried it, it didn't work, the students hated it, I stopped. Don't stop, just use them in a different way. And if you use them in the right way, they can be highly successful, and you can get quotes like this. 5.11.1 was an enriching experience for me, especially since I had relatively little chemistry background in high school. Being able to learn so much and eventually win the clicker competition, plus the wonderful, nerdy Green Lantern t-shirt was, I have to say, pretty awesome. All right, so what else did we do? Selective pressure number 2. We have a lot of people in our class who are not going to be chemistry majors. How can we convince them that chemistry is relevant to what they do want to study? So we thought we'll incorporate examples into the class that show the connection between chemistry and another discipline. I'm a biochemist, so the discipline I picked was biology. So if I was talking about oxidation reduction in class, normally you talk about an electrochemical cell, but you can use another example where you talk about a living cell. Living cells live because of oxidation reduction reactions. So how well did this work? All right, so here the control group is no bio examples. The treatment is biochemical examples. So we asked students whether taking the class increased their interest in chemistry. Not in biology, we asked, help me relate chemistry to other sciences. And I liked that. I liked seeing that learning this related to something else. But could we do better? Could we interest more of those students? Could we show more of the students that there's a connection between chemistry and the discipline they're interested in? So the next thing we did, our next selective pressure, was the use of videos. And here comes the filmmaker and the artist. So we made a series of short videos. These are 2 to 5 minutes. More of them are around 2 minutes. So this isn't changing the whole class. It's just instead of giving this example, you show a video. So students could hear about graduate student Stephanie and how Vesper theory could be used to develop tools for soldiers in Afghanistan to detect explosives. They could hear from postdoc Hector about why studying the solubility of gases in liquids could be important of thinking about ways to sequester carbon dioxide. Or you could hear from undergraduate, yes, that is undergraduate Samuel from his Europe experience, talking about pKa's and why pKa's are important if you want to decide probes to study living cells, which has applications in human health. So how well did this work? And here, Rudy Mitchell from the Teaching and Learning Laboratory developed a lecture impact scale, a series of questions that got at the impact of the lecture. And this included whether students were motivated to learn chemistry, whether they were inspired to tackle challenging problems, and if they're aware of the value of an interdisciplinary approach and interdisciplinary knowledge. We found that all students reported a bigger impact, a bigger gain from the treatment part of the course, the part of the course with lectures. But this data plot actually has me the most interested. This is new data, it's your first group to see this. The control, again, without videos, when you think about gender, Women reported much lower impact in the control part of the class without videos than men, quite a bit lower impact from the lecture. But with the introducement of the videos in the treatment parts, these lines actually cross, and the women report a higher impact. And to me, this really says that one lecture or one classroom is not equivalent to the next lecture or the next classroom. This control classroom is a very different place for the female student than this classroom over here. So I will end, I have one more quote, and this quote is from a male student here, and he said, "I liked the videos and the clicker questions. They kept me engaged. Me, a man who once swore that he would never be engaged." To that I respond, booyah! Okay. So just to summarize, the disadvantages of the lecture can all be addressed. We applied selective pressures and we got students to think. We helped students identify weaknesses. We engaged students with different career paths and we showed them images of different people in the field. These were small changes. This is 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there. Small changes make a huge difference. So if the lecture is dying, we can save it. We know how to apply the right selective pressures. We can evolve the lecture to be a better learning experience for all students. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. If you can just come to the microphones. Start on the right, yeah.
Hi. All of your speeches were wonderfully interesting. Regarding the last one, I wonder about the supposed trade-off between education and research. How typical are you? What got you excited about focusing on how you were doing the education and the specific outcomes? How many young professors, as they come in, say, I've got to think about research and publication. I can't think about clickers and sections. And how typical do you think you are?
So what first got me interested in education is that in high school I took chemistry and I hated it. And I got to college and they told me I had to take chemistry. And I said that I wanted to study biology, and I was quite sure that chemistry had no relevance to biology at all. And they told me to take it anyway, and I discovered that I loved chemistry, became a chemist, and have been a chemist forever. And so for me, it had such a profound impact, that freshman chemistry lecture. And I said, if I ever get to be a professor, I'm going to teach freshman chemistry, and I hope that some other people will have their eyes open to the effect. So I've actually been teaching freshman chemistry here since 1999, so I got that wish as well. Maybe I shouldn't have said it quite that way.
And do you think you're typical, I mean, in terms of your interest in education?
You know, I think that more and more people are interested, and what really gives me hope is I've been doing teacher training for graduate students in the chemistry department and now in biology department. And there is this wonderful group of individuals who really want to be teacher scholars. They want to do both at the highest level. And I am just so inspired talking to these graduate students, and often the ones who come that talk to me about their real passion for education and for teaching, they're the ones winning all the research awards too. So I think more and more we're seeing that research and education go hand in hand.
From Baltimore, an educational counselor. I also want to talk about that last topic of lecturing and the future of the lecture. One thing I will say, everything you said is right, but I still feel that all of that could be incorporated in online lecturing, video streaming, internet, whatever. The reason I'm saying that is because I've continued my education after graduating from MIT, lots of distance learning, online classes. What I miss are the recitation sections, the interaction with peers on campus, and the team problem solving. But as for the lecture itself, to introduce the material, what are your thoughts on, yes, you can do all this, but you can do all this in a videotape lecture, avoid the students getting up at 9 a.m. As long as they see the lecture before they come to recitation, can we still do it that way? Thoughts?
So You know, a lot of our material that we're developing is all online, so I don't feel like we have to create too much of an artificial dichotomy. But one thing I will say, in doing teacher training for so many years, what we do, the first thing we do, I talk about get to know each other exercises with your teaching team, and everyone goes around the table, and these are all graduate students coming in, and I said, you know, what made you decide to study the thing you studied? And when I ask what made you decide to study this, it's almost always a classroom experience with a particular professor, that there was some kind of connection. And there's a few exceptions to that. But I see that kind of connection of the person standing there in often an intro or not a real advanced class, but often one of the more beginning classes had a huge impact. So I think it would be, I don't want to move away from that personal contact, and even if it's a bigger room, I still think that that person standing there in person can make a difference. But there, as you're right, there's lots of other ways, and MIT is embracing the online in a big way, so.
Great. We have time for about one more question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim Pollack from Boulder, Colorado. Catherine, while I like a lot of the increased engagement and bringing in the interactive aspect to the live lecture, one of the disadvantages, of course, is the one speed fits all, which translates to one speed fits none. And how do you address that, and how should we do better at that in the lecture environment?
Yeah, so it is true. I mean, we in freshman chemistry often cover a whole year, what some people cover in a year in one semester, and the rate at which the material is going can be fast for some people. And I actually think this can be a great way that online resources can be helpful to help bring some people up to speed. And of course, the recitations, with the people leading those recitations in smaller groups really helping to cater to those individual needs. But it is a big problem.
Thank you. So let's thank our panelists, and we'll move on to the next section. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Hastings, Dean for Undergraduate Education and Professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics and Engineering Systems. So lots of interesting things are happening in education. You've heard some of that this morning. These are just really exciting times. New paradigms are being tested and defined, some of it driven by things that are being initiated at MIT. We're going to, hear from a number of speakers briefly in terms of their comments, and then open it up to you to ask your questions as you've been doing, addressing the subject of rethinking learning for the 21st century. So some of the things we want to try to address in this session are, what is the future of on-campus education? How do we think about how the residential experience is going to evolve? As we do these things, how should we be reaching out, and what's the effect on the larger community, high school students, alumni, learners around the world? How is this technology fundamentally changing teaching and learning? And where is it actually going to lead us in the decades to come? I mean, these are big questions. I'm not sure we certainly can ask them. We don't know the answers, but the very fact of thinking about them helps us to actually move forward. Let me just introduce our speakers. Mitch Resnick is a professor from the Media Lab. He's an expert in exploring how new technologies can engage people in creative learning. He's going to address the subject of how technology is changing teaching and learning. Laurie Breslow is a senior lecturer from the Sloan School and the head of the Teaching and Learning Lab here. She's an international expert in how in learning and higher education and change that occurs in higher education as a result of our thinking about learning. Michael Plasmeyer is a student from management and computer science, and he will give, he's also been heavily involved with the Council on Educational Technology here at MIT, and he will give a current student's perspective upon these changes and what they mean and how students think about them. John Essigman is a professor in chemical engineering, chemistry and biological engineering, and he's also a housemaster. So in addition to being a toxicologist, he can also address how the residential experience, as we think about it, will actually change potentially in the future as a result of these changes. So with that, let me first of all ask Mitch to, they're going to make their comments from the chairs here to make his short set of comments to start us off.
I think there's one thing that all of us can agree upon, and that's that we live in a world that's changing more quickly than ever before, that all of us are constantly confronted with new and unexpected and uncertain problems and situations. And as a result, success in today's society, and even more so in tomorrow's society, is going to be based not on what we know or even how much we know, but on our ability to think and act creatively, on our ability to come up with innovative solutions to the unexpected situations which we undoubtedly will face. A lot of people talk about today's society as a knowledge society, but for me, I think it's more of a creative society, because creativity and creative thinking are really the key to success and happiness, regardless of whether you become a journalist or an architect or a politician or a marketing manager or a scientist or an engineer or the president of MIT. It's the key to success for everyone from all backgrounds and all walks of life. But there's a problem that in most parts of our education system today, we aren't preparing people to grow up as creative thinkers. In too many schools, the focus is on teaching a disconnected set of facts and skills. And, rather than helping young people develop as creative thinkers. And what's the role of technology in this? Unfortunately, in many places, technology just reinforces that. Oftentimes, technology is being used to optimize the teaching of disconnected facts and skills. Too often, these wonderful technologies are just being used to help people become somewhat more efficient at the same old ways of doing things. And that's what we really have to change. As we rethink teaching and learning for the 21st century, we need to really rethink and transform the way we think about how and what we need to learn and how and what people are going to learn. That's really what we've tried to do in our work, in our group, in my group at the MIT Media Lab, when we've worked for many years with the Lego toy company to develop new robotics invention kits that allow middle school students to build robotic invention projects, similar to the way that MIT students do during IAP and during the year. And in the process, middle school students learn engineering ideas that previously weren't learned until the university level. But more importantly, they learn to become more creative thinkers. Or we also developed some software called Scratch, a programming language that lets everyone from age 8 and higher to build their own and program their own interactive stories and games and animations, and then share their creations online. Millions of kids around the world are using it, and they've shared nearly 3 million projects online. In the process, they've learned to think more creatively, reason systematically, and work collaboratively. As we've worked on these projects, I think what we're really trying to do is to bring the MIT spirit of designing and creating and inventing, and making that accessible to learners everywhere. And I think that really highlights that there's a role for MIT to play, an important role, in fact, an imperative role for MIT to play, looking ahead at serving as a leader, a beacon, a model for these new approaches to learning, and more specifically, new approaches to using technology to support learning, to show that new technology is not just used to have more efficient ways to deliver information or instruction, but really can be used to empower people, to allow people to develop as creative thinkers so they can become full and active participants in tomorrow's creative society.
So Dan Hastings is my boss, and last night at the reception, he said, You have 3 minutes, and because I'm not a mathematician, scientist, or engineer, he held up 3 fingers. So I'm going to do the Reader's Digest version of what we know about learning and its implications for higher education generally and MIT more specifically. So the first thing we know about learning is that it's active and that learners construct their own knowledge. Now, sometimes people in my business, when they say that, it's automatically interpreted that that means that lectures are bad. And I am in absolute sympathy with my good friend and colleague, Kathy Drennan. Lectures can be used well for certain kinds of learning. But the field, that is the field of teaching and learning in higher education, has developed a full range of pedagogies, curricular organization technologies, and I think what we need to do is to think about how to use them strategically. And by strategically, I simply mean that we need to think about what pedagogy, what curricular materials, what technology is used best to help our students learn what we want them to learn and know what we want them to know and to be able to do what we want them to do. So some people in my business talk about learning outcomes or learning objectives. And the MIT faculty, you can see the hair on the back of their necks stand up when we use those terms. All we really want is to think hard about what we want students to know or to be able to do, and then to choose strategically the means that we're going to help them do it, realizing that learners construct their own knowledge. The second thing we know about learning is it's complex. It has cognitive elements, it has emotional elements, and it takes place in particular contexts and particular environments. My friend and colleague Kim Vanderveer talked a lot about learning outside of the classroom, and I think MIT has been a leader in developing ways that students learn outside of the classroom. But we know, as Mitch has said, that technologies are changing those contexts. And we need at MIT and in the field of higher education to be able to tailor learning for new kinds of contexts that we have never thought about before. And then finally, we know that learning is collaborative. And by that, I mean it's a human endeavor. And I don't care how many technologies we create, at the base, learning is one human being helping one or more human beings to learn a new skill or to gain new knowledge. Now, we know some best practices about using what we call in my business interactive pedagogies in the classroom. But we also know that technology is expanding the number of students who can work collaboratively, and in particular, the diversity of students who are going to be working collaboratively. And I think we have a fabulous opportunity, again at MIT in higher education, to make sure, and this builds on what Mitch said, that the students have the skills and they have the knowledge to be able to work with this increasing number, and particularly this diverse kind of students whom they will be in collaboration with.
Thank you. So, first of all, I'd like to say thank you. I think this is a very exciting to be here, time to be here at MIT. I want to speak about 2 themes, accessibility and quality in learning. And for me, MIT was one of the most affordable options, when looking at which school to select. And I think it's, through the generosity of the folks at MIT that I'm able to be here, not just today, but these 4 years. And I think we can do this very well at MIT for about 1,200 people a year. But how do we scale this? And with, looking nationally at education with the rising costs, and are we getting to a tipping point where people might not be getting value out of education? And then I think we should be able to ask, are there opportunities for more economies of scale? And then even internationally, where people have little to no access, I think it's even more critical that we find ways where we can bring education to people and help them expand their skills in a way that's where we can reach as many people as possible. And I think with MITx and the other initiatives, we have a great opportunity to change that. But on campus, we have a different issue. We have further opportunities to increase learning of our students. Career fairs today, MIT students do very well at these things. I think last year, most number of companies ever at their career fair. So it's really, can we further increase quality in learning? And there are aspects of online education like the instant feedback. I was working up till 5 a.m. the night before, working on a 6858 PSET, looking for that, not green check mark, but those green letters passed on the black background, right? Can I get that? Can I get this particular buffer overflow to work and delete the file, as expected? Opportunities for greater collaboration, for greater personalization. People come to MIT, all types of backgrounds. Can we get them up to speed and give the people who need extra help the extra help they need, and then provide the extra challenge for those who are ready, and provide this basic learning ground so that we can do these very individualized experiences that you heard from earlier about, like 2009 or Dlab. And doing this online stuff is hard, and that's why I'm really excited that MIT is providing this platform, providing this opportunity as an institution to have these set of technologies through edX and set of best practices through Teaching and Learning Lab and through others, that we're able to take best practices and iterate them over the long run. Some of my favorite courses at MIT have been the largest ones. And that might sound counterintuitive. We always hear about smaller classes, but the larger ones really build up best practices every semester. They're tweaked slightly, and they're very effective at delivering information. So I think with this with MITx, we're able to combine the two. We're able to have the economies of scale that we can educate these thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and that we're able to offer additional experiences to the people who are on campus right now. It can't, we said early on, it can't be separate. MITx can't be the separate department that has its own faculty, that does its own thing. It really has to be an integrated part of the campus. So I think we're at a very exciting time in MIT's history. Thank you.
I'm going to make a few comments with regard to teamwork from the perspective of a person who's both a housemaster and a teacher. MIT is strikingly similar to some other institutions like Bell Labs and the former Xerox PARC, in that we create an ecosystem of problem solving by bringing together a critical mass of people who are outrageously creative and develop in them or have already a can-do attitude. Teamwork is really absolutely essential to this, and we try to teach it in the classroom, but it happens quite naturally in the residential system. I'll give you an example. So in my day job for many years, I teach a course in biochemistry. I'm in Kathy Drennan's department. And the exams are hard, but the problem sets are harder. They come from the real world, and the real world, as Mitch said, can be kind of messy. And I felt a modicum of, I don't know, I guess I could say guilt over giving these really hard, challenging problems to students, like I was doing harm. But then becoming a housemaster, I sort of see another side. I see that these problem sets are a challenge. The students undergo what a biologist would call adaptation, in that they form groups. They solve the problems late into the night. Michael worked until 5. I typically see it at 2 o'clock if I wander around. You see these clusters of students that are gathered together, and at about 2 o'clock, the problem set is pretty much solved. There's a look of accomplishment in their eyes, and that's thing number one. But the second thing is there's a social bonding that has happened, and this is a bonding that I think becomes covalent and eventually will carry certainly through my course, and then ultimately, through the careers of these students. So how can we do this teamwork thing perhaps even better? And that's where I sort of look down the road to the future. I just want to say, for one thing, as a housemaster of many years, the students who do the teamwork thing real well do very well at MIT. Those that don't find this place much more challenging. Teamwork is a stress reduction tool. So how can we do it better? I just want to give you 3 thoughts. Okay, one of them is in the residential system, let's think of it as a big laboratory. A laboratory that has in it the objective of creating teamwork at every level. Electronics workshops, wood shops, arts and crafts rooms, kitchens that aren't built to just serve food to one person, but kitchens that are laboratories where you can figure out how to, as it actually happened, create ice cream on an engineering scale. A second thought is to get a little more relaxed with the students and say, feel the freedom to manipulate your workplace, your living environment. Kind of develop this old building 20 attitude, and those of you who've been around will know what I mean. For example, if the students want to write on the walls, find a way to make it happen. Get this idea paint or something. If they want to put in a ball pit, give them a Sawzall. These are things that I think that are very important among a group of students that are very much engineering oriented in their minds. And the last thing I'll say is I think that something that we ought to do is to capture this process. So many things at MIT, we keep reinventing the wheel again and again, but wouldn't it be neat to use sort of the spirit of like an open courseware to say, let's capture these guys doing this really neat stuff in the dorms and make like an open residential life and learning where. I think that would be really neat, that we could show each other how we do it, one residential group to another, or other schools how to do it. Thank you very much.
So let's open it up for questions, from you in the audience, or for that matter, from the panel of each other. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Hi. Some of the things that you said lead me to wonder that, one of the skills that we're trying to, that MIT is trying to be good at is teaching. And I'm just wondering, there are lots of opportunities for students to learn that skill, but I don't know if there's any formal thing that goes on to actually get them to, because practice of that sort of thing is very important. So I'm wondering, what you guys think about that.
Laurie, do you want to address that? Do you know anything about teaching people?
So we, at the Teaching and Learning Laboratory, I'm not sure if you mean undergraduates, graduates, undergraduates, okay. Right. So there are, and Michael may know better than I, several student groups, Splash being one of them, that actually reach out to the community to teach, and we do work with those groups on a very limited basis. But I saw Eric Kluffer in the audience, and he also runs as you probably know, the teacher education program, and that allows MIT undergraduates to get certified to teach in Massachusetts. So there are some little opportunities.
Some things I think we could do in more informal teaching of one another. So an experiment that we're doing at the Media Lab now is having an online system where people can say what they're interested in learning about and what they have expertise in teaching, and then matching up people within the community where they can learn from one another. And that, of course, always happens in an informal way throughout the MIT community, but I think there's more ways that we're experimenting with providing some more structures to help match up people with the right skill sets that they can teach and learn from one another. I think there's going to be a lot more of that.
Also, I just wanted to point out, I think some of our most gifted teaching assistants at MIT are undergraduates, and the 4 of us are being wired in the back, so I don't know whether Kathy Drennan mentioned teaching assistant training, but she created a wonderful system within chemistry with the help of the Teaching and Learning Lab. So I think that the undergrads have an opportunity to get some formal training. I think that benefits them when they go to graduate school or postgraduate school of any type.
Yes, sir.
One of the more depressing things about becoming an old coot is that I've found that I've worked very hard all my life to find out how ignorant I am. And I've sort of felt that part of teaching the facts and what we know ought to also include what we don't know. And part of problem solving should be to consider what we don't know and what are the problems that need solving. And I think there's been a lack of this kind of thinking. I cite as an example, last week, ENCODE came out, which is the encyclopedia for DNA, DNA function. And I think what it shows could be a surprise to some, but some of it should have perhaps been thought up and talked about sometime in the past. Do people have comments on this?
Comment? How do we teach what we do?
Well, I think if you look at some of the broad open courses like 2009, it's the Discovering Product Design class. It's like a capstone project for course 2 students, for mechanical engineering students. It's very broad, wide open. The theme this year is outdoors. That's it. You have to start from doing the user research to find out what people need, what the market needs, and then you go from there to develop a product to the first prototype stage, physical prototype stage. So I think there are many of these opportunities, especially in junior, senior year, that students do, that are very broad and wide open, and you have to definitely figure out step 1 is what is the problem here, and then, only then can you start moving towards what the solution could look like.
Harbo Jensen from San Francisco. Question for John and perhaps Dan. With edX, there's been a lot of focus on the residential experience here, both the classroom in Europe, but also the residential experience in the dormitories and the learning. We require freshmen to stay on campus, but the upperclassmen are increasingly moving off into apartments as they get older. And how does MIT engage those students in a residential type experience when they're living off campus? And what are you doing along those lines?
That's a really good question, Harbo. I'll just give you one example from the perspective of the department in chemistry. Well, we didn't know edX was coming, but I think this plays well to it. But just this past week, the Department of Chemistry, in collaboration with OpenCourseWare, launched a course that's online called ChemLab Bootcamp. It's basically freshman chemistry class that we captured on video last winter, and then it's just being released in 11 episodes, again, starting Monday. Just look ChemLab Bootcamp, and it's on iTunes and all this other kind of stuff. But what it does is it shows the students working in the lab, but it also shows the relationship they form among one another, the relationship with the TAs, and the relationship with the instructors. It shows them also, they were all given flip cams, so it shows them in their living group and how they interact with one another as they put together their lab reports and so on. And we hoped, but we didn't really think we would accomplish the goal. I think we captured a snapshot of what I see every night as a housemaster. We saw undergraduate experience, the life and learning thing. And I think that MITx, this is all done with this high technology, and I think that this plays very well to the MITx theme, lab class, online, inspirational young students, and I think that's my answer.
And I think about the living groups, so I live in a dormitory, but I have many friends that live in fraternities, sororities, or independent living groups that are MIT affiliated, and I think about 97, 98% of students live in some sort of MIT affiliated living group. So it might not be a dorm per se, but it's a house maybe with all MIT students. And I think that is one of the real strengths of this school, is that people are here on weekends. People are engaged essentially 24/7, and that's absolutely part of the learning process.
Great. So, final question.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Ed Moriarty, class of 76, mechanical engineering, and I currently am an instructor at the MIT Edgerton Center. I open up our lab every Saturday for high school students, but we end up with pre-K through postdoc and older there. And all I do is open the door. Usually I have a cup of coffee, and that's the prep for it. All I do is I open it up for unstructured play in a constructive environment. And I've personally, in my experience, that to me seems like it's the thing that's been drained from our, especially, K-12 area, where kids can just come in and tinker in a place where they're just supported to tinker. I have no agenda on them, and they're there just to play, tinker, and they're with a bunch of other people that tend to like to do tinkering and playing, and we make incredible stuff. And they feel very engaged by this, and they get drawn in. I'm just curious, can you speak to that?
Mitch, do you want to make a brief set of comments?
No, I certainly agree. And it connects to my own research group. It's called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group. And it's because we're inspired by the way children learn in kindergarten, where they do that type of tinkering, and they're constantly building in collaboration with one another, building towers with blocks, pictures with finger paint. And as Ed was saying, that often gets drained away, once you go into first grade, second grade, up through, and you just have to spend too much time sitting, listening to a lecture, filling out a worksheet. And even, unfortunately, kindergartens are becoming more like the rest of school. And what we want to do, and what you're helping to do on the weekend, is to make the rest of school and the rest of life a little bit more like kindergarten. So I do think MIT should also strive, and I think one of the things that's best about MIT compared to a lot of other places is there is that type of joyful spirit of tinkering and experimenting. And I agree, we have to make sure that it's sustained here and serves as a model for everyone else.
Okay, so, right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Yep. And the Chancellor will now reintroduce the President.
I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I hope you've got a little bit of an insight as to what's happening here at MIT and how we hope to change the world, because that is part of our mission. I want to invite Raphael to say a few words. I think he has something happening right after this, so I'm guessing it's going to be short. Raphael.
Just let's reflect for a moment what happened this morning. We spent the whole morning here at MIT talking about education. And also talking about research on education. In addition to that, you had samples of some of the best thinkers here brainstorming openly about the future of education. The interesting conclusion you can reach, if you would agree with me, is that everybody this morning was right. Which means, how do we put all this together in this campus to create the future of education? I have a few more things to say about that, but for that, I will invite you to please come to Killian Court this afternoon, around 2:30 or so, and you'll hear my views on that. This is the end of 3-day symposia that were absolutely terrific. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the inaugural planning committee, and Dwayne Bonning is the chair right here, and please join me to give him a round of applause. They have done a terrific job with this symposia. And with all the events this week, if you hear my voice somewhat rusty, it's because an event that he organized with the Council for the Arts right now with the Caracas Brass Ensemble, I partied too much and my voice is almost leaving me. I also want to thank Chancellor Eric Grimson. Where is the Chancellor? Here is Chancellor Grimson, together with Dean Christine Ortiz and Dean Dan Hastings, and the leadership of the Alumni Council that is here. This is the Leadership Council that is here today and tomorrow and yesterday. They put together this symposium for you, a terrific symposium. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to also thank the faculty and students and staff who presented this morning and the last few mornings. It is really great to see how all of them, coming from all parts of MIT, can work, as the motto of the week says, as one community together in service. So thank you very much for being here, and I'll see you in a little while this afternoon. Thank you.